Cities around the world, especially here in Canada, are rapidly growing and densifying. But with more people and limited space, cities are struggling with traffic congestion, climate change, and road fatalities. Unfortunately, this is not a problem we can solve with cars. Cars take up a lot of space and are very deadly and destructive. They might work well in rural areas, but in a dense city, there's simply not enough space for everyone to drive their own private vehicles. So if we want to meet the growing travel demand, we have to invest in more sustainable forms of transportation. This of course includes trains and buses, but cycling and other forms of micromobility are equally as important. Cycling is probably the best form of transportation within a city. It's clean, it's efficient, and it's healthy. But cycling only accounts for 1% of all trips in the US, and Canada is not much better. This pales in comparison to countries like Japan, the Netherlands, and Denmark, where a lot more people cycle for various purposes. The single biggest factor for this is safety. Streets in the US and Canada are extremely wide and dangerous. Nobody is gonna cycle here apart from food delivery guys and mammals. No, not that type of mammal. I meant mammals. Middle-aged men in lycra. But tons of research shows that a safe network of protected bicycle lanes is the best way to get people of all ages and backgrounds to cycle for everyday purposes. It's more important than any other factor, including weather, hills, or distance. This website analyzes hundreds of cities around the world and how long it takes to reach basic amenities by walking or cycling. Every single area shown in blue means that services like food, education, healthcare, and leisure are reachable in less than 15 minutes on bicycle. So despite how sprawling North American cities are, most people don't actually need to travel that far on a regular basis. But still, the majority of those trips are made by driving. In the US, half of all vehicle trips are 5 miles or less. When everyone has to drive a car for every trip, no matter if they're simply getting a coffee or commuting across town, it creates tons of traffic, leading to lots of noise and air pollution, dangerous streets, and the sedentary lifestyle contributes to obesity and other health problems. So while it might make sense to drive for longer trips, we have a huge opportunity to convert more of those shorter trips into cycling. In the Netherlands, where 28% of all trips are made by bicycle, most people actually choose to drive for trips beyond 10 kilometers. But it's those short everyday trips like shopping, going to school, or going to the train station where most people cycle. And this is possible because they've built high quality bike infrastructure almost everywhere. It's a common misconception that the Netherlands was just always this way because it's a small and flat country. One survey in Toronto found that most people would choose to cycle if there was safe infrastructure. Safety and careless drivers were the top concerns for people interested in cycling. So building bike lanes is the #1 way to get more people to ride bikes, and many studies from various North American and European cities confirm this. When you build it, they will come. But building bike lanes in the US, Canada, and other English-speaking countries is very hard both culturally and politically. Cars have dominated our streets for decades, and most people aren't used to cycling for everyday purposes. So taking space away from cars and giving them to bikes challenges the car-centric status quo. Bike lanes, especially here in Canada, are heavily politicized and are a huge culture war issue. Recently, the Ontario government announced that they will ban bike lanes from being built if they remove car lanes, and they promised to tear out existing bike lanes on the grounds that they make traffic worse and hurt small businesses. 'Cause yeah, bike lanes make traffic worse. Just look at how all these bike lanes are taking up space, blocking cars and trucks on our most important streets. Except, look at what's really causing the traffic here. It's the cars. Cars are the single biggest cause of congestion on our streets because they are insanely inefficient in large numbers. Every single one of these people cycling are making traffic better because they chose a more efficient option. The vast majority of people aren't devoted to a single mode of transit. When you build your city around cars, people will drive. But when you make walking, cycling, and public transit fast, safe, and convenient, people will walk, cycle, and take transit. In the Netherlands, where bike lanes are found on almost every major street, it must be hell on earth for drivers, right? Imagine how bad the traffic is because of all these bike lanes. Except, according to the Waze Driver Satisfaction Index, which analyzes the experience of over 65 million people in 38 countries, the Netherlands is consistently ranked as the best country in the world for drivers. So the best way to solve congested streets is not by creating space for more cars. It's using the space more efficiently by providing viable alternatives to driving. When you only see the world through the window of an SUV, it's easy to think that it's those bike lanes that are taking up space and causing traffic, that bike lanes only serve the minority while getting in the way of cars, trucks, and emergency vehicles. By the way, did you know that both Toronto Fire and paramedics have said themselves that bike lanes did not slow down response times?
We currently do better than the citywide average with respect to response times.
That's correct. And we have not found any evidence of challenges as a result of the installation.
In fact, according to the Toronto Fire Deputy Chief, response times actually improved on Bloor Street since the installation of new bike lanes.
Show that your response times have been improving.
If you make bike lanes wide enough, they can even turn into express lanes for emergency vehicles to bypass traffic. Because ultimately, when you only build your city for cars, it fails for everyone. Less cars makes driving a much better experience for those that want to or need to. Viable alternatives to driving benefits everyone, including drivers. The problem I have with all of this is that people always complain about bike lanes and how they take up so much space and block traffic. But no one cares when lanes on major streets are used for parking, which is much more common than bike lanes. What's funny is that in many cases, the space currently used by bike lanes would have been used by parking anyways, so removing the bike lane won't actually create more space for traveling vehicles. If anything, traffic will be worse because all those people cycling will have to ride in the middle of car traffic, blocking vehicles behind them. And of course, that's insanely dangerous and will lead to people dying. So why are people so laser focused on bike lanes? Why aren't they saying, on-street parking is blocking our major streets and taking away valuable space. Let's remove them and put them on side streets. Instead, they only seem to care about traffic and emergency response times as long as it doesn't take away their ability to park their cars wherever they want. Studies also show that bike lanes improve sales for nearby businesses compared to on-street parking. A study from Toronto showed that people who cycle spend more money and visit shops more often than car drivers. In New York, bike lanes on 8th and 9th Avenues increased retail sales by 49%. Another study on 6 cities across the US found that bike lanes largely improved business, or at worst, it had very minimal effects. Because when you're not in a metal cage going 50 kilometers an hour, you're much more likely to stop and purchase something impulsively. And in a walkable neighborhood, very few people are driving anyways. Studies on Toronto's Bloor Street show that drivers were only 10% of all visitors. 90% of people either walk, cycle, or take transit. In another part of Toronto, half of all business owners thought 25% of their customers drive. But it was actually 4%. Over 70% of customers either walked or cycled. So while some people claim that bike lanes hurt businesses and that they need to be removed, actual business owners and business associations have come out in support of them.
Bike lanes save lives!
And yeah, bike lanes save lives.
The problem is, people from North America and other similar countries simply don't take cycling seriously. Cycling is perceived as a sport or for recreation. Bikes are viewed as toys for children or for those who can't afford to drive. Because of how dangerous and stressful it is to ride a bike, the only people that do cycle are the adventurous and risk-taking types, which creates a stigma around cycling. People think cyclists are all entitled savages who break all the rules and put everyone in danger, and this is often used to argue against building bike lanes. But keeping cycling dangerous by not building bike lanes is only making the problem worse. The whole point of bike infrastructure is to make cycling a more safe and relaxed activity, which will attract more people of all ages, genders, and abilities. This also includes families with children. Cargo bikes are a very normal thing in many cities that make cycling safe, and this is much more enjoyable and allows kids to be more familiar with their surroundings, rather than having them sit in the back of an SUV while they play on an iPad. Of course, when cycling is safe, kids can also just, bike themselves to places and not rely on mommy and daddy to drive them everywhere. Cycling can also be very useful for making deliveries. Both FedEx and Purolator have been rolling out these electric cargo bikes in many Canadian cities, and This really is the future of urban freight transportation. We shouldn't be shaping our cities to fit the vehicles we want. We should be shaping our vehicles to fit the cities we want. But none of this is possible if you only build your cities around cars and make cycling an extreme activity that only appeals to a minority of people. This is part of a common argument against building bike lanes, that no one ever uses them. The minority of people are taking up space for the majority of people who drive. The Ontario Minister of Transportation, the Minister of Car Dependency, claims that only 1.2% of Toronto residents cycle to work. That number is from 2011, before any of the major bike lanes were built, and it includes the entire Toronto region and all of its suburbs. So, incidentally, his tweet got a lovely community note correcting his misinformation. Here's what the cycling commute mode share in Toronto looks like in 2021. In some parts of the city, shown in dark green, more than 10% of the population cycles to work. And these numbers are most certainly higher today as the city has built so much more bike infrastructure in the past few years. Keep in mind, this only includes trips to work. According to a Toronto survey, 70% of residents say they ride a bike for any purpose, whether it's for work, school, shopping, or recreation. 70%! Another great metric is Toronto's bike share system, which has grown dramatically every single year. People made 5.7 million trips in 2023, and at the time of making this video, people have already made 5.3 million trips so far in 2024. Even in January of this year, people made over 200,000 trips. Yeah, in January, using bike share. But there is truth to this statement. When you look at a map of bike lanes in North American cities, is it any surprise that very few people cycle? Apart from a few bike lanes downtown and a few pockets of trails in the suburbs, there's no comprehensive network that ties it all together. Often, these bike lanes just end abruptly and tell you to go die. Here's a brand new bike lane in Toronto that many people have been complaining about because it's always empty. I never see any cyclists using it. But this bike lane is not even finished yet. Currently, we've only built the orange parts as part of a new LRT project, but the city still has to fill in the rest, which is the blue parts. So, I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure not many people are gonna use a cycling route that's still under construction. Here's another bike lane that's designed very well, but it's a tiny section that's completely isolated from the rest of the cycling network. So, unsurprisingly, barely anyone is using it. Just like roads or public transit, bike lanes need to form a network. You can't judge how useful a single bike lane is when the whole network is still in its early stages. When you compare a map of the amount of people who cycle with a map of the city's cycling network, it's no coincidence that the areas with a comprehensive network of bike lanes are also the areas where most people cycle. The fact that very few people cycle currently is kinda obvious, right? Of course no one bikes in your city when your city barely has any bike infrastructure. Just like how no one would drive or take transit if your city has no roads or public transit. So using the problem to argue against the solution to said problem is not really helpful. So yes, when your city is still going through the growing pains of developing a cycling network, some bike lanes will be underutilized. Some of them will cause bottlenecks for car traffic. But the more we try to delay, cancel, or even remove bike lane projects, the more we'd make these problems worse. The question isn't whether or not we should build bike lanes just because very few people use it currently. The question is, how do we design and implement bike infrastructure to get more people to cycle? One solution that's often brought up is to just put bike lanes on side streets and leave the main streets for cars. There, you get your bike lanes while not blocking important arteries. Problem solved! The problem here is that people need to go to places on the main streets, not on the side streets. Here's a bike lane that's built on a side street, but it runs through nothing but single-family homes and is not connected to a cohesive network. And so, what do you know? You hardly see anyone using it. No shit. And then people will point to this and use it as proof that bike lanes are useless. Of course, the point of all of this is safety. Here's a map of Los Angeles. Wow, look at all these bike lanes. Surely lots of people must cycle here, right? Except when you look closer, most of these are just painted bicycle gutters on the side of a high-speed strode. These are terrible, not just because they offer no physical protection from cars, but also because people don't respect them. There's a very common situation where drivers use the bike lane as a parking spot. This isn't just about inconveniencing cyclists a little, this can literally kill people. Recently in Toronto, a woman was run over and killed by a truck, all because a dumpster was blocking this bike lane, causing her to merge into traffic. What's even worse than painted gutters are sharrows, which are just painted symbols that ask drivers if they could please kindly share the street and avoid murdering people. The problem is that sharrows create a false sense of security. It made cyclists believe that they are safer on these streets, making them act less careful. In London, sharrows were found to increase cyclist injuries by 34%. Bike lanes should be physically separated from motor vehicles with a buffer, and ideally should be protected with a barrier, whether it's trees, concrete, or bollards. Especially in the suburbs where there's tons of space, bike lanes can be wide enough for people to ride side by side or pass each other. And of course, this also makes them very useful for emergency vehicles. Adding bike lanes can also make the street fundamentally safer. Tons of research shows that wider roads lead to higher vehicle speeds and more fatal crashes. But bike lanes are a great way to narrow down these wide streets, making it safer for everyone. One study found that a protected bike lane reduced the top speeds of right-turning vehicles by 28%. But in many cases, the physical protection just ends once you reach an intersection, where ironically you need it the most. Painted bike lanes are often placed on the left side of a right turn lane, meaning cars have to merge over the bike lane. This is because at an intersection, drivers making right turns would have to look behind them to see an oncoming cyclist, and this can easily lead to a very deadly collision. But this solution is pretty much just as, if not more, dangerous, so bike lanes should always be kept to the right. Another issue are left turns. Most people aren't comfortable riding across the middle of a big intersection like a car, which is why many people just use the crosswalk. Some intersections have bike boxes, which are dedicated areas where cyclists wait to make a turn. But usually these are still just paint, and paint is not infrastructure. This is where the protected intersection comes in, where bike lanes go around the intersection like a big roundabout. To make a right turn, you just turn right while yielding to pedestrians. To go straight, you wait here for the traffic light, then continue straight. To make a left turn, you cross to the other side, then cross again, just like a person walking. This solves the issues from right-turning cars, as cyclists are placed in front of a driver, making them more visible. These also have the added benefit of reducing the size of the intersection, which forces drivers to make turns more slowly and reduces the crossing length for pedestrians. Protected intersections really are peak bicycle infrastructure, but although they're found all over the Netherlands, they're sadly not that common anywhere else, even in other European countries. Some cities in North America have started building them, and it's gonna take a while for people here to get used to them, but these are a huge step in the right direction, and they will save people's lives. Now, if you think about it, bike lanes are really only necessary on busy roads. On small residential streets, speed should be low enough to where cars and bikes can safely mix together. But here in North America, local streets are still way too wide and have almost no traffic calming measures. This means cities still have to go through the long process of proposing and building bike lanes or painting sharrows on these streets, when they should be safer on their own. Here's what a properly designed residential street should look like. It's narrow and has a textured surface. The intersections are visibly and physically raised up to the level of the sidewalk. And the curbs are extended out to create tighter corners. These types of streets are so safe simply by their design that they don't need any stop signs, traffic lights, or speed cameras. Drivers are guaranteed to slow down because the street design makes it physically impossible to drive too fast. And of course, streets like this don't just benefit cyclists. They're also much safer for people walking, people in mobility devices, as well as children. Because ultimately, it's not just about bike lanes. I always hear people complaining about those e-bikes and e-scooters on sidewalks and how they are such a huge threat to people's safety. First of all, cars are way more dangerous, but traffic violence has become so normalized that we don't even think about it. but that's a topic for another video. Second of all, it sounds like bike lanes would be an amazing solution. Because as a society, we are trying to make our cities more sustainable and safe. We want to reduce traffic, pollution, and road fatalities, especially in a growing city. But keeping our cities dependent on cars is just not the way to achieve that. We have to start encouraging micromobility, whether it's bikes, scooters, or mini cars. But our cities are not built for these, so we will face challenges trying to integrate them. And yeah, sometimes this can lead to slightly worse traffic and dangerous situations, so it's understandable why many people are skeptical. But sometimes we need to think in the long term and see the opportunities that are staring us in the face. Even if you personally can't cycle or don't care about cycling, bike lanes benefit everyone. It gives people a clean and healthy alternative for getting around. Having less car traffic is better for everyone's safety and quality of life. This is not about getting rid of cars, it's about getting rid of car dependency. Driving should be for those that want to or need to. It shouldn't be forced upon everyone just because we failed to build good infrastructure. True freedom is being able to choose how you want to get around. The freedom not to have to drive.